the voice of the Blue Eagle, Radyo Katipunan 87.9.
Radyo, 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 Katipunan, radyo, Katipunan, radyo, Katipunan, radyo, 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 Katipunan, radyo, Katipunan. The voice of the Blue Eagle, kami di mapipigil sa pagbabalitang tumpak at tama. Sa labas ng eskwela, ating ibibida lahat ng eskwela. Radyo, radyo, Katipunan. Radyo, 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 Katipunan. Radyo, Katipunan. Radyo, Katipunan. Kawal ni Ignacio, Katipunero sugo. Todo sa kayod, tunong at tulong. Lipad na Blue Eagle, galing hiding at tigil.
The Jesuit Hour. Get to know the Jesuits. Discover their spirituality, their history, their ministries. The Jesuit Hour. Anything Jesuit, everything Jesuit. The Jesuit Hour.
Magandang umaga mga Katipuneros. Good morning po sa inyong lahat. Welcome to our show here at Radyo Katipunan 87.9 FM, the Ateneo Campus Radio. This is the Jesuit Hour and I'm your host, Father Nono Alfonso S.J. Yes, we are very excited today because we have a very special show. Yes, today here at the Jesuit Hour, we are launching a new book. Signs of the Times. Ayan, Our World Through the Lens of Vatican II. It is published by the Jesuit think tank, the John J. Carroll Institute on Church and Social Issues, and of course, the Ateneo de Manila University Press. But before we do that, mga Katipuneros, before we introduce our guests today, dasal muna po tayo. Let's open the show with a prayer. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Look upon us, O Lord. Hear and enlighten us. Show us your very self. Teach us to seek you. And when we seek you, show yourself to us. Let us seek you in desiring you and desire you in seeking you. Let us find you by loving you and love you in finding you. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Ayun po. That prayer is, of course, Saint Anselm's, one of our favorite philosopher saints. I remember in college, we were told in our philosophy classes that our faith is intelligible, rational, reasonable, nux. It is a faith that seeks understanding. That's Saint Anselm. And how apt, how appropriate, because today we will be talking about one of the great turning points in the history of the Catholic Church, the Second Vatican Council, or Vatican II for short, which is of course the subject matter of the book we are launching today. Just to give you an idea, here is a short clip about the book. Ayan, ang ganda. And now, to formally launch this new wonderful book, let us call on its publisher, represented by its director, Miss Paula Deles.
Maraming salamat po. A blessed day to everyone. On behalf of the John J. Carroll Institute on Church and Social Issues, I am very pleased to welcome you all to today's event. Thank you for joining us as we officially launch ICSI's new book, Signs of the Times, Our World Through the Lens of Vatican II. The Second Vatican Council was a critical juncture in the history of the Catholic Church. And as the Philippines celebrates 500 years of Christianity this year, ICSI is excited to share with you our new book, looking at how the last 6 decades of the story of the Philippine Church and the Filipino faithful has been influenced by Vatican II. At the opening of the Second Vatican Council, we remember how Pope John the 23rd said, "Open the windows and let in the fresh air." In the context of the current pandemic, it is quite striking and meaningful that the Pope's message then remains relevant today. Let the fresh air in. We need a renewed spirit, an open, adaptive, and dynamic church that is willing to engage the present world, especially in this time of deep crisis. As enunciated in the Philippine Pastoral Council II, this involves working towards social justice and becoming a church of and for the poor. In light of the more recent developments in Catholic social teaching, this also involves caring for our common home. Our new book is a collection of essays by esteemed men and women from church and civil society. These writers share how our collective story as Filipino Catholics has been shaped and influenced by Vatican II and its related Catholic social teaching. They discuss how Vatican II has changed how the Church engages society, the relationship between the Church and the state, the role of the Church in politics, the history of Church social action in the country, and the contribution of the Church to social development, with a particular focus on the urban poor, farmers, cooperatives, and the labor sector. This collection also includes reflections on how Vatican II continues to challenge the Church to break boundaries in terms of promoting solidarity with people of other faiths through interreligious dialogue and promoting gender equality by expanding spaces for women's participation in leadership and decision-making. We hope that this book can be an inspiration for the Church, its leaders, and its people to keep moving forward in realizing the spirit of Vatican II. For us Catholics, we hope this book will encourage us to reclaim and live out more fully its call to the Church to promote social teaching and be a transformative force, a force for hope, especially in these challenging times. Thank you very much.
Salamat po, Miss Paula, and congratulations again on this book project. Now, let us meet our distinguished reactors. We have sent them in advance copies of the book to read, and today they will share with us very briefly their evaluation of the book. Let me introduce our panel of reactors. First, we have the distinguished Bishop of Caloocan, who is known for his staunch stand against the government's war on drugs. With a doctorate degree in biblical theology from the University of Louvain, he teaches at various seminaries and theologates. He is also a book author with 3 or 5 titles already under his belt. This year, he was elected President of the Catholic Bishops' Conference of the Philippines. Friends, please welcome His Excellency Bishop Pablo David.
Thank you very much for inviting me to comment on this wonderful collection of articles entitled Signs of the Times, Our World Through the Lens of Vatican II.
Grabe, mga VIP po ang kasama natin ngayon. Nakakalula. Moving on, our next reactor is highly respected in the social development circle as well as in the academe. She is professor at the Department of Sociology and Anthropology here at Ateneo de Manila University. She is also connected with the Institute on Philippine Culture, where at one time she was its director. When we were in college po, no, she was already legendary. Her articles were required reading. Friends, the distinguished Dr. Mary Racelis.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mary. Good seeing you again here after our conference. Kailan nga ba yun? 2 weeks ago. And finally, completing our cast is a relatively fresh graduate from the Ateneo de Manila University. He has worked in NGOs since graduating and is currently the Advocacy and Information Management Officer of the Catholic Education Association of the Philippines, or CEAP. Please give a round of digital applause to our youth representative, Mr. Carlo Abadines.
Thank you for this opportunity.
Thanks everyone for being part of the panel. We would have wanted to do this, of course, live in a studio or in a conference hall, but with the ECQ and the pandemic, we can only do it online or digitally. Shall we begin? Excited na po ako. Let us ask then our first question, which is, why read this book? I guess we have to start there. Bakit nga ba kailangang basahin itong librong ito? What do you think is the importance or significance of this book to the youth, to this generation? Sinong unahin natin? Yes, ladies first. Yes, Mary?
I think the book brings out, in many, many ways, because of the different experiences that are expressed by the different authors, it brings out in many ways what happened in all of those 50 years, or more, since Vatican II. So as a kind of a historical record of what has been the past, I think it's a very important addition to our knowledge. I only wish that there had been maybe somebody who is not squarely in the church setting, the loyal opposition, you might say, those who might have taken another look to say, there are other views of this, but maybe book 2.
Yep. It indeed provides a glimpse of church history. Your turn, Carlo. Same question.
All right. I think when I was reading through the book, the first thing that struck me, and I was reading the stories, I think it really serves as an inspiration. Just reading the stories actually of those who've gone before, who moved, because of their faith, who acted and protected the marginalized sectors. As I was listening, I was reading the stories. It really served as a sort of inspiration, for me. Understandably, when I was also reading it, I did come to realize how many people really know about Vatican II. How many young people in my generation actually know about the Catholic social teaching, and part of me was, when I was reading it, I felt partially jealous, like why was it so alive in the previous generation, right? In a sense, those who have gone, the ones who are older, they felt it, it's so real. And yet when I talk to young people now, people are leaving the church. People don't know the wealth of the richness of Vatican II and what it was calling young people to move towards, And I think that's why it's refreshing, right? Because once people read it, people begin to realize this is how the church should be, right? Especially in a context where young people are getting disillusioned by institutions, or why are we so too caught up with doctrine? And when I'm reading this, right, you get a pulse na this is what the church is all about, right? Really going out to the peripheries, going out to the poor. And I think that's its biggest contribution today, to bring back that message. It's been more than 50 years, when the Vatican II happened. And maybe for some people, they don't really understand how much of a change it really created, And maybe that's what the book can bring, for us who'll be reading it, Yeah. So inspiration, it's really an inspiration, and I really enjoyed reading it. Yeah.
Wow, good to know that a young person like you enjoyed reading it. After all, Vatican II happened way before you were born. Yes, Bishop, what do you think? For you, how significant is this book?
Well, it is a precious reference book for those who want to know how the winds of renewal brought about by Vatican II have swept through the Philippine Church. How Vatican II made a profound impact on the many aspects of both our ecclesial life and our societal life as Filipinos in the past 56 years. How it found the most concrete expressions in many church-initiated advocacies and programs of social justice and the sustained aspirations for the upliftment, such as the upliftment of the landless farmers and the rural poor, of the workers and the urban poor. How it promoted a more participatory church, how it reoriented us towards greater inclusivity, ecumenism, and interreligious dialogue. And most of all, how we allowed the spirit of renewal, and to use the vocabulary of Vatican II, aggiornamento and resurcimo, to guide us in the Second Plenary Council of the Philippines in 1991 and its pastoral priorities, such as in the promotion of Church of the Poor, renewed integral evangelization, and the basic ecclesial communities. The testimonies contained in this book are no doubt partial, but well documented, and enough to demonstrate that although the Philippine appropriation of Vatican II is still a work in progress, we have already gone a long way. In fact, a much longer way in just the past 5.5 decades than all of the preceding 4 centuries of our history as a nation and as a local church during the colonial and the neo-colonial periods.
Salamat po, Bishop. Yes, our own PCP2 in 1991 was the product or the inspiration of Vatican II. Good to be reminded of that. Thank you all for your honest responses. Now for our second question. Yes, reading the book, what was your general reaction, feeling, or sentiment? What part of the book struck you the most? Is there any particular part that moved you, challenged you, or inspired you? Let's start this time with the youngest. Carlo?
I think it was beautiful how the book tried to get the lens of various sectors, no? The ones who, in a sense, have been continue to be marginalized today, no? Whether it be the agricultural sector, the concerns of indigenous people, the urban poor, the laborers, no? And I guess as I was reading it, it really made me kind of really reflect, no? To what extent have I lived my life with the poor, no? You know, when I was reading the stories, grabe talaga yung mga kwento na people spend weeks and months immersing in communities, no? People lived with the poor, people lived ayun, in the urban communities, would go out in the rural areas. And I try to look back even at my own experience, how difficult it is, even for my contemporaries to do that, no? We may have the desire for it, we may wish, no, to live more closely with the poor, but it's so difficult now, no? Parang how can we just disappear for a month, right? Do we still have such opportunities, no? And even though I've been doing my work for 6 years already, right? Faith and justice, talking about the Catholic social teaching, I still feel like after I read through the book, again, there was this jealousy na parang may kulang pa ako. I wish I could do that more. Parang I wish I could live with the poor in that sense, no? And recently, even in our group, the Prophet Project, and it's really young people who came together, no, for faith and justice. This became part of our realization, na we can talk about justice, we can talk about why theology or why our faith needs to respond to the different issues. But it's so difficult, parang minsan may disconnect, no, na we're not able to live with, no, the poor. And so sometimes, you know, we kind of think, is this just theoretical, etc. And I guess that was a disturbance. It was something that bugged me actually while I read the book, no, parang kulang pa, no? Parang kulang pa. Meron pang pwedeng gawin, no? And I think that was an invitation, no, to me also. How do I do that, no? Does that mean I have to let go of some of my time in the weekends, right? To really be purposive about it, no? So I think that was really one of the most beautiful. It's a challenge, no? It's a continuing challenge also for our generation, no? And the second thing that I really enjoyed reading, and I was really amazed, was the opening chapter actually by Father Fox Rivera. No? He talked about the idea, the IRIS framework. That was the first time I've heard it. And usually when we do structural analysis, and as you know, social science students, you know, you get very caught up in just understanding, ito yung mga structural problems. These are the problems of society, it's systemic, etc. And when you talk about it, it feels like it's so hard to change that. No? But the framework of Father Fox, he was really showing us that there is a way, right? There is an opening, there is a point of agency. And as I was reading that, sabi ko, I wish this kind of tool can be taught, no, to us, no, the younger generation also, that we may use this, especially since so many young people feel like they're locked in a system that they cannot change, no, and that kind of framework opens up that, no, na there's really a way to move forward, no, moving from this. So. Yeah, I think those were really the insights, no, that I enjoyed, no, and very much part. And maybe there's one last thing that I just wanted to highlight. I think it was the second last chapter, especially about the theology, feminist theologies, no, and changing our symbols. Because even part of the community I belong to, we're very open, no, to exploring this kind of conversations. Now, what's the role of women, right? How will the church engage the issue of the LGBT issues, right? And what was beautiful about that reading was that it's not a dead end, right? Like sometimes it feels like it's like that, right? Like when the church suddenly, you know, creates a pronouncement, and then you get friends who are very disappointed, faithful friends, no, women, LGBT communities who feel like they're being disenfranchised. But when you read it, these are female theologians who are fighting and saying, no, the Vatican II spirit allows us to actually create dialogue for this. No? And when I was reading that, I was like, that's the spirit. No? And I actually know these people also. I was like, at least there are people who are opening up these spaces also. No? So that was a very refreshing take, at least when I was reading the book.
Same question po, Bishop. What did you find striking, inspiring, or challenging in the book?
I was struck by the fact that the testimonies in the book belong to my generation and the generations before ours. Most particularly relevant for me were the articles on church and politics, social action, church involvement in agrarian reform, and the plight of the urban poor, as well as the article on women and their participation in societal and ecclesial life. I must say practically everything in it. I was most deeply struck by the realization that the Spirit had been silently at work in persons and programs that tended to be ostracized or viewed with suspicion at the start. I think, for example, of Father Walter Hogan, Father William Masterson, Jeremias Montemayor, etc. They make me think of the current trends, the various socio-political orientations and dynamics that are still currently at work within the Philippine Church, among bishops, the religious, and the laity. I think, for instance, of the directions that have been taken by various lay renewal movements that have boldly challenged the church hierarchy to outgrow its clericalistic, self-referential, and inward-looking tendencies, to use the vocabulary of Pope Francis, including the strongly patriarchal and androcentric, or sometimes even sexist biases within the church, such as in terms of gender issues. I see them now in continuity with the directions that the post-conciliar pontiffs have taken, but most especially those that had been prioritized by Pope Francis himself in his encyclicals and apostolic exhortations, as well as in his recent call for what he calls a greater synodality in the church. You know, of course, that we are preparing for a pre-synodal consultation. in preparation for the Synod of the Church on Synodality in October 2023, but will be launched already in October of 2021, and I would like to ask you to please take an active part in the pre-synodal consultation. I found particularly challenging the articulation of the scriptural and theological basis for the ambivalent portrayal of women's identity and role in the church. I am inclined to think that the concept of gender complementarity has to be founded first and foremost on equality in dignity among the baptized, following St. Paul's idea of a discipleship of equals in Galatians chapter 3, verse 28, which I found, quoted several times in the article. There is neither Jew nor Greek, neither slave nor free, and most of all, neither male or female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus, says St. Paul. Without this basic assertion of equality in dignity, complementarity can degenerate into a typecasting of roles from a patriarchal and androcentric perspective, which unfortunately remains as, sadly, the prevalent view even 6 decades after the Second Vatican Council. And I do say that with a lot of humility and sense of remorse as a member of the hierarchy myself.
A synod on synodality. Wow, that seems very promising. Thank you, Bishop. And how about you, Mary? What was your favorite chapter in the book? What did you find challenging or inspiring?
Yes, I'd have to say that it was Sister Audrey Wong's piece on labor organizing. And that's not because the others were not interesting, because all of them were interesting. All of them are interesting because I lived through that era with all of these people knowing the struggles being faced, right? I know the urban side very well, so Jean Carouse's piece reinforces many of the things we've been struggling for, pro and con vis-a-vis the church. The same with rural, because I've been very involved. But labor organizing was somewhat peripheral, I don't know quite why, but it was peripheral. So when I read her piece, I really learned a lot. And I guess that's the criterion I'm looking at. I know all of Father Ritchie, Dennis Murphy, I know all those stories, and I'm happy to have read them again from their perspective. But the only one I didn't really know was the labor organizing. And Sister Audrey really brought that out, I think, very well. And let me add, she's the only one that really talked about also women workers. That's one of my kind of issues with this book, is that none of the chapters really, bring out, when we talk about the urban poor, the rural poor, the co-ops poor, they don't bring out what was women's role in that. I think there are a couple of references to the RH problem, implied as women, but that was very, minor, never really focused on. Sister Audrey looks at workers, but then she says women workers have a different set of problems or issues than male workers, right? Although they have a common concern. So the fact that she brought that out even further enhanced my high regard for her portion.
Yes, I like that article as well, Sister Wong's piece on labor. Great. I hope our viewers are able to follow. React lang po kayo. Please just message us on our Facebook and YouTube pages. Okay, let's continue. My next question is, do you agree or disagree with the analysis, sentiments of the book or its specific chapters? Has the church really done enough for the marginalized sectors and to promote a faith that does justice? Bishop?
Do I agree or disagree with the analysis, sentiments of the book or its specific chapters? Well, I am very comfortable with the form that the book has adopted. It is very narrative in style, and I'm comfortable with that because I'm a storyteller myself. there is a constant reference to the see, judge, act method, a constant mention of the church's simultaneous sympathies and discomforts with either the right-leaning or left-leaning directions in social action, a critical use of ideological methods of analysis or social analysis, a recurring insistence on the breaking out of the church's institutional interests in order to effectively respond to what Vatican II calls the signs of the times, and hopefully to truly grow into a pro-poor church. Has the church really done enough for the marginalized sectors and to promote a faith that does justice? That's a quotation from the Synod on Evangelization. The church has certainly done a lot already in just the past few decades. Like I said, a lot more than she has actually done in the past several centuries before Second Vatican Council. But whether or not the church has done enough, I actually would prefer to leave that to the poor and the marginalized sectors of church and society at large to judge. I have become more conscious of the fact that our moral teachings on marriage, sexuality, and family life are mostly crafted from the perspective of male celibates, and that there is much left to be desired with regard to the openness of the church to listen to the actual day-to-day experiences of individuals, of couples, and families. Pope Francis has already initiated some bold moves in his Amoris Laetitia, despite the vehement reactions on the part of those who still accuse him of compromising the moral teachings of the Church, despite his obvious reticence and tendency to hold back on certain issues, including the issue about the women's roles in the Church. I realize how difficult it must be for Pope Francis to keep the Church united around Jesus' insistence on mercy, compassion, and redeeming love over moral righteousness and orthodoxy.
Salamat po, Bishop. Very interesting points. Pwedeng isang episode po yan dito sa Jesuit Hour. Yes, Mary, your turn. Agree or disagree with the general assessment of the book on Vatican II?
Well, I think I'd have to say one of the good things about the book for me was it did bring out all the things that church has been doing through, but largely through laity, which is fine. People, ordinary Filipinos of all levels, who, because they are Catholic or have that sense of faith, do what they do in the context of Catholic or Christian values. This is not to, diminish the role of the official church, but I think that's something to keep in mind as we read this book, that we say the church, and the thinking is often the clergy, the bishops, maybe the nuns, although the nuns always get short shrift. As the women who actually make this church work every day, the sisters, they get almost no recognition, even in this book, right? Except for some specific mentions. So what I see in the book is that it leaves out so many of the problems of a larger set, that because of the structure of the church. Every contributor talked about how they struggled or their sector struggled and some of the issues, and so they were critical. They are critical, which is fine, but they're always the loyal criticism, right? And that's okay too. But nobody, in my view, sufficiently addressed other issues of the church. The decision-making, very top-down, still to this day, although happily we have Pope Francis, who is trying to change structural, organizational aspects. But this hierarchical structure is still very much there. It's top-down decision-making. And of course, since women are almost nowhere involved in decision-making at the higher levels, then it proceeds with this super-clericalism, which is one of the main problems of the church today. The way that priests and some bishops, think they have the right to decide for or tell other people what they should do and criticize them and castigate them. Now, I know that's maybe too strong, but I'm really reiterating this because of the RH debate. That is where I saw the evils of clericalism, that those they were so opposed, understandably, but would not listen. And we were trying to say to some priests, some bishops, listen to the women. This is a women's issue. This is a family issue, but it's largely the women who suffer. So we're not even looking at the population side. We didn't, those of us who are actively supporting, pushing for the RH passage of the bill, we're saying, look at the situation of women, what choices they have. Come on, Vatican II was very strong on the freedom of conscience. And we can tell you from our research, plus those NGOs, church groups who work with them, that, when women, for example, decide that they will go for an induced abortion, of which it said that we have at least 800,000 per year in this country, which is, they're all very unhealthy. They cause many deaths, which is why the Philippines has one of the highest maternal mortality rates still in Asia, at least 1/4 of that because of botched abortions, which they go to kung sino-sino, helots and so on, or they do it themselves using hangers and all kinds of sticks. And you can imagine the infections, they wind up in the hospital, and then they don't get really the care because Catholic nurses and doctors, thinking they're following the rules, the views of the church, in the past at least, would say, oh, diyan kayo. Yeah, kasalanan nyo yun. We know you did that. But of course they will never admit the way they were treated, which is why we felt the bill was necessary for the dignity and well-being of women. All right, and that's when I saw the clericalism, unwillingness to listen, the assumption they were always right. And then the follow-up of some bishops, that those who voted for the bill should be, removed. Or in fact, us, faculty of the Ateneo, the 14 of us who wrote a statement saying you can be Catholic and vote for the RH bill, fortunately, the Jesuits, who are really great thinkers and moral supporters, while placed in a very difficult position within the magisterium, nonetheless said, both presidents, Father Nebres and subsequently Father Jet, that the faculty wrote this from their own scholarly backgrounds, from their own research. They did not say they were representing the Ateneo, which is very true in their statement. They did not say they represented the Ateneo de Manila. They made a very specific statement that this was drawn from their own research experience plus contact with NGOs and community groups, women especially in the field. And to the credit of the Ateneo, I have to say, I'm happy to say that our right to say that was established, even though there were strong pressures, we know, on the president and so on, to dismiss us, the 14 of us, Anyway, so it is that RH thing that really made me rethink, what is the church, I know what the great things they were doing in every other sphere, but in this, the blindness and unwillingness to listen, really got me really angry. And when you get angry inside, try not to, then you take steps to point out, try and point out where they have to move. And that has given me, I think, the ammunition, if you want to say, to keep going, to be critical, to be respectful of the church, certainly to promote the ideas of Jesus Christ, who was the original that we think would probably have voted for the bill if he were around, either if he is, but in person at this time, because of the principles there, okay? And the fact that, in Vatican II, the artificial contraception was already approved by the majority advisory groups, and yet the later Pope just turned it down because of the advisory of 2 people, So those things didn't come out in this book. And I think that's a sad, in a way, but maybe book two. Okay, I'll stop there.
Wow! Umiinit na po dito. Thank you for your very honest answers, Mary. Yes, I remember those contentious days during the passage of the controversial RH law. And yes, a book two or a sequel of this book will be much appreciated. O ikaw naman, Carlo, what say you? Agree or disagree? Has the church done enough for the poor?
I guess the first thing that struck me when I read the question, enough, enough. I think there is really an acknowledgement that the church is moving towards a direction when it's deepening its commitment even further. It's been a history of the church naman, no, to always be with the poor. There's always been many saints, no, who's called for the church to reform that way. And even as I was reading the stories, no, many of them were always sharing that it was that faith, it was the spirit of Vatican II that led them to that outward movement, no, to go to the communities to fight for social justice, for the concerns of the poor, to represent them, no. And so there is an acknowledgement that yes, I think the church has done, no. But whether the question of enough, I think, becomes the bigger question, because I think when we look at what's happening in society today, we are being confronted with the realities na parang lumalaki yung mali, right? There seems to be greater and greater problems that are confronting us, whether it be inequality. This pandemic has shown us how broken, how there were so many cracks, no, that's happening in society. Is the church doing enough? No? And I think that's when it becomes difficult, diba? It seems like the possibilities of what could be done or what needs to be done is getting bigger. And so enough also becomes, difficult, right? And I think that's where the tension lies, right? No, parang how do we keep giving more? No, certainly I think the church still has a lot of space to reform. No, interestingly, yeah, in the community I belong to, these were some of our reflections. Also, we have issues with the church. We personally don't approve and agree with everything, and yet we know that it's the place where we're growing and we're also fulfilled. No? So there's this desire for the church to do more, no? To do more, no? To commit more to the work of justice. And I mean, just based on my work for the past many years, no, doing political education, trying to get people to understand better why faith necessarily, or our faith, when we say we love God, it necessarily calls us to love our neighbors. And yet that isn't intuitive for everyone. No? It's not intuitive. It doesn't seem to be at the heart of sometimes, no, the people that we know who are very faithful to going to church, diba? And I think that's where the more is being asked of us, diba? I mean, the Catholic social teachings continue to be a secret in the church when it shouldn't, right? Why is the social doctrine a secret? No, when it's so rich and it's so energizing, no. Maybe I just wanted to share a bit of my own experience also, because I mean, there was a time that I almost gave up on the church, almost really gave up, because I was so frustrated with how the church was. And then in my theology class, and this was a privilege that I was even given the opportunity to have a good theology class, I was introduced to Vatican II. And then I was introduced to Albert Nolan's Jesus Before Christianity. And at that theology class, what was being said to me was that at the heart of Christianity was a call to compassion and love for your neighbor. Right? Even though I struggled with the idea of God then, I became interested again in what Christianity was all about. And I think that's the kind of stories we have to start sharing again more. No? Sometimes I think that the faith that sometimes we inherit, it becomes very individualized. No? It's about me and my God. It's about my salvation. It's about making sure I don't go to hell. But I think we lose the richness when we're being called to community, to care for the person who's suffering, not just to feed him or her, but also to change the structures. Diba? That's ano. So I guess, are we doing enough? We're doing something, but I think with the gravity of everything happening around us, I think we as a church, not just the hierarchy, the church as the people of God, I think we're being strongly invited, no, to commit and live out even more, no, to do more, no, for a faith that does justice. No, parang ganun.
Thanks for sharing that personal story to us, Carlo. And thank you, for not leaving the church. Okay, now for our final round of questions. Heto. Looking at the present and forward to the future, how can the church better live out the call of Vatican II in our time? What do you think are the most pressing issues to address? Carlo, ikaw uli ang mauna.
I think for me, the first thing that I became very interested in, one is lay participation, genuine lay participation. Of course, it's growing, in PPCs, etc. But sometimes even at the field of theology, it's still very dominated by religious people. I mean, I study LST, and 90%, 95% are really, religious. And every time I say I'm studying theology, everyone will say, magpapari ka ba? And I would say, no. I think lay people can do theology and should be doing theology also. No? And I think that's part of the spirit of Vatican II also, to listen. And when we did our PCP2 here, Plenary Council in the Philippines, it was, lay people were participating. And even Pope Francis has emphasized that even more, the dialogue, the church that talks and listens and dialogues, genuinely. I think that's an opening for us. How much do lay people have in terms of shaping theologies? Our experiences that we face as lay people, that becomes part of the realities of theology. Di ba? Hindi pwede maging static si theology. It has to be answering our concerns also as young people. So that's the first, I think. There's that, the promise of Vatican II that can still be deepened further. Second, I think is really an invitation to young people to understand this a bit more, Vatican II. As I was saying, I shared multiple times, in this sharing. I think the difficulty is that so many young people don't know Vatican II, right? We also don't know kasi the experience of what it was before Vatican II. So it's also very difficult. Like the church that we grew up with is, in a sense, the church post-Vatican II. But we know that there are still elements that is not Vatican II-ish, di ba? Parang kulang pa yung pagka-Vatican II ng simbahan ngayon, yung changes, what it was calling for. But maybe I think the same way that I think it inspired and moved me, the way that the words of Vatican II calling us to dialogue with the world courageously, I think that story needs to be told to young people. Because I think even though Vatican II happened, sometimes it feels like church is doctrinal. Church is so rules, And I think we have to confront the fact that young people are moving away, parang are disturbed by that, And so the invitation for that fresh air to really confront the questions, I think young people need to understand also, medyo karapatan natin yon in the spirit of Vatican II. As members of the church, we actually have the openness to discern these questions. Hindi siya parang set in stone. Of course, there are things that should be set in stone. But that dialogue, that wrestling with doubt, di ba? Parang, that is the spirit of Vatican II. It's okay not to know the answer, right? It's okay not to say that this is the truth, right? This is the absolute truth. Kasi, sa totoo naman, we have friends who completely have different beliefs from us. At sasabihin ko sa kanila, mali ka, ako lang yung totoo. Hindi yun yung spirito ng Vatican II. And I think that's the face of the church that I feel young people need to see also. Rather than the hierarchical, top-down, legalistic, it's the dialoguing church. It's the very relational church. It's the communitarian church. It's the church that goes back to who Jesus was and how he was relating to everyone. No? I think that's the church, that's the image of God that maybe the church needs to fight for more aggressively. No? I remember in some of my theo class, parang binabalikan nila, ano yung imahe ng Diyos sa isip natin? No? At yung bumabalik ay, he's like a judge. No? The judge of, kung mamatay ka, pupunta ka dyan sa impyerno, or pupunta ka or you go to heaven, di ba? Or someone who punishes you if you do wrong, or someone you're afraid of when you sin, right? That's still the dominant image. And I would say, even for me, working in the Catholic Church, in Catholic educational institutions, I think that's still a dominant image. I have friends who come out of Catholic schools feeling guilt, di ba? Like they don't feel compassion and love out of their experience in the church. You know? Especially if they were LGBT, they feel like they've been judged completely, right? But what's the image of God that we're pushing for? Baka maganda maging conscious tayo doon as a church. What is it, the judge or is it the prodigal father, di ba? Is it the judge or is it the one that goes for that one lost sheep, di ba? I think those are the images that every time I go back, yun naman yun si Jesus yun di ba? Parang that's what our faith is calling us, no? And the third, and I don't know how this is also how we confront this as a church. No? I guess it's mistakes. Confronting its mistakes as a church. No? I actually don't know if, for example, sometimes I reflect about the 500 years of Christianity. And of course, there's tensions, no? If Christianity didn't arrive here, I don't know if I would be Catholic. Di ba? Parang ganun siya. But at the same time, when Christianity came here, it was also very imperial, or I don't know. But I think more recently, for example, all the abuses, the cases of clerical abuse in the church. You know, to what extent have we been openly saying also, diba, that we're a wounded church? You know, in the same way that Pope Francis is very honest about it. No? May sakit tayo hindi tayo perfect. We're not the perfect institution. And you know, some people are saying will that turn away people? And part of me is saying, actually, I think some young people might come back to the church when they begin to realize that there is humility in the church to say na it's not perfect. Right? It doesn't have the truth and the only truth. No? Kasi yun yung naririnig palagi na ba? But when it becomes more open to saying na I'm open to listening, I'm open to other perspectives, I think that's a breath of fresh air for young people. Di ba? I think that's more connected with our personal experience of differences, of mistakes. No? Yun. And I think that image, no, of us all, we're messy, we're broken, but we're journeying together and God is with us. And I think that's a beautiful image, I think, that the church can still work on, no, much more powerfully. Whether it be in the preaching in the Mass, in our catechism, no, in our Catholic education. I think that's something I think the church would benefit from, and very much connected to Vatican II and its spirit. No? Yeah.
Alam mo, Carlo, ibibigay ko sa iyo ang number o contacts ng aming vocation promoter. Mukhang nasa mali ka yatang bukasyon. Joke lang po. Yes, Mary, looking towards the future, what should be the church's primary concern? in the spirit of Vatican II?
All right, number one, I think, listen. Listen to the laity. My goodness, not only that we're doing the actual work, which is the way it's supposed to be, that kind of partnership, but remember that notion of sensus fidelium? Hey, that's us, right? You have faith in us? Listen to us. Listen to our advice. You know, let's discuss. It's not that we're always right, but please, let us at least have a decent discussion as peers. So I would say that would be one. B, you know, I work a lot in urban slum communities, you know. Be there. There are so few priests, bishops. Once in a while they go when somebody wants a mass said, but you don't see the church as church represented there. You see wonderful nuns. The nuns are the ones who are doing all the work with the poor. And yet, you know, they're sort of there. They're the handmaidens. All right, so that's another part of what do we do now? To me, the church should pay attention to these wonderful theologians we have now. There was a great session just 3 days ago, I think, at the Ateneo of theologians, 2 women and 1 male, who were looking at feminist theology. And you know, generally that's a no-no if you're talking in general. But they showed that feminist theology is taking another look at the world, but at the Bible, and seeing how has it dealt with it. There are those who say, dismiss it, hopeless. You know, this church is hopeless. The Bible just shows you know, how women should be, which was nothing, handmaiden, etc. There are sort of sequences that these theologians pointed out, and they all concluded that where we are now is to look observation, you know, to a new theological learning process where the Bible reinforces, or, you know, you look at the Bible in another way. What was not said, what was implied, and in today's world, what does it mean now? I think the church has to do it because it's in terrible straits by and large. I mean, of course, we know North America, Europe, it's down, down, down. In Asia, it's still, you know, up, but imagine, we are the only Catholic country in Asia, except for Timor, small. And are we really leading in Asia? I don't think so. I mean, the way we are regarded, you would think being a Christian country, we have something else to say. And what is that? I mean, maybe that's where, not so much for, you know, converting Muslims, Buddhists, and Hindus, but, you know, the presence of the values that Christianity, and through the Catholic faith, has promoted, right? And so just finally, I guess, going back to the theology, looking at men and women, you know, unfortunately, our Pope Francis, whom I think all of us revere very highly, the one thing he hasn't grappled with, or at least he doesn't want to grapple with, is this gender issue. He still, you know, uses that gender complementarity. Women have their roles and men have their roles. Of course, they overlap. But the new theology, as I understand it, does not accept gender complementarity, but looks at people as wholes. So I think the church has a lot to learn in the next few years, and I hope they listen to people at all levels, you know, not just advanced theologians, not just social scientists like us, but get back to the grassroots, work with people. And the thing is, unfortunately, there are not so many anymore, yet you know, the structure is based on priests with certain qualifications. There are so few priests now, and the profession is really undermined by clerical abuse charges, right? That reputation. So come on, the church has to recognize, hey, why don't you bring in women to become priests? Because then we would have a church that is genuinely holistic in looking at men and women and families, and would bring great things. You ask the Anglicans, you ask the Protestants, all of whom have Protestant pastors and so on, and they will all agree, women in those positions have changed the perspectives and made it a more humane, human, compassionate church. So our church is missing out by stopping women, preventing them from top positions. And one day, you know, we should have a woman pope. I tell you, that would change the church and would make it really for people. And that's it.
Thank you, Mary. The church needs to listen and be present, especially among the poor. A woman pope? Wow. You don't have to react to that, Bishop. Our final question, Bishop, is, of course, not only are you part of the church hierarchy here in the Philippines, but its very head, its president as well. So, sa tingin niyo po, ano yung dapat pagtuunan ng pansin ng simbahan? What should be the focus of the church in the coming years?
Well, I think by heeding the call of Pope Francis to outgrow parochiality and clericalism in the church, by taking more seriously his challenge for us to make way for greater inclusivity and greater participation in the church, by empowering local churches to become more genuinely missionary, by weaning themselves out of self-referentiality towards reaching out to those in the peripheries, those in the margins of society. I consider the encyclicals and the apostolic exhortations of Pope Francis to be far-reaching contributions to the Church's social teachings in the 21st century context, especially Laudato Si and Fratelli Tutti. His insistence on greater mindfulness on the climate crisis, for example, his advocacy against a throwaway culture, his call for intergenerational justice and care for the earth as our common home. And lastly, what are the most pressing issues to address or things to do? Well, admittedly, there are still very strong tendencies towards a more clericalistic and triumphalistic church. And I think we have yet to effectively address some belligerent attitudes among certain circles in the Catholic Church. It is not easy to deal with those who simply cannot let go of their traditional ecclesiological and soteriological paradigms. Those who hold on to the idea of the church as a perfect society, and most especially those who stubbornly cling to a patriarchal and androcentric and perhaps even utilitarian and sexist worldview in both ecclesial and societal life. Well, we are a work still in progress when it comes to consciously working for greater inclusivity, for ecumenism, for interreligious dialogue, for mutual respect and tolerance, for pluralism, and an outright repudiation of proselytization in the work of evangelization. We also have to have the humility to admit that we do not have a monopoly of charity, of mercy and compassion, and care for the disadvantaged in society. We have yet to learn to enter into partnership and collaborative work with civil society, with other communities of faith, with fellow Christians beyond the Roman Catholic tradition.
From clericalism to gender issues, wow, there is certainly a lot more to be done. Indeed, our work is already cut out for us for the coming years. But for now, we would like to thank you, members of our panel, for your honest and insightful reactions to the book, our book, Signs of the Times. We would have wanted to have more discussions. We can keep on discussing, but that is all the time we have. Thanks for those who have sent their messages and feedbacks as well. Sorry, di na po namin masasagot, makabasa ang mga yan. But having said that, you can always, of course, get yourself a copy of this wonderful book. So you can read up and reflect and find out more about the legacy of Vatican II to our church and to our world. And here is how you can avail yourself of this book. Ayan, parang awa nyo na po. Please, bili na po kayo. Before we go, can we perhaps hear once again from our publisher, Miss Paula?
Before we end, I would just like to thank a few people who made the completion of this book project possible, as well as those who helped us in this launch. First of all, our writers, our book editors, Didith Mendoza-Rivera and Ellen Dionisio, our publisher, the Ateneo de Manila University Press, our media partners, Jescom and Radio Katipunan, and our team at ICSI, and our panelists and reactors today, and all of you who joined us for this book launch. Maraming salamat po.
Thanks, Paula. And with that, my dear friends, we say thank you for joining us today. Again, get yourself a copy of Signs of the Times, Our World Through the Lens of Vatican II. I promise it will be a good read, a good companion during this pandemic. That's it. Goodbye, everyone. See you next time. Be safe. Bye-bye po.
The Jesuit Hour. Get to know the Jesuits. Discover their spirituality, their history, their ministries. The Jesuit Hour. Anything Jesuit, everything Jesuit. The Jesuit Hour.